It was a calm morning in the small town of Brookdale. The sun had just risen, painting the streets with a golden glow. Birds moved from one tree to another, and the cool breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass. On one of those quiet streets, a dark-colored SUV moved slowly toward the main road. Behind the wheel was a woman in her early 30s. Her hair was tied neatly, and her face looked calm but focused. She was on her way to meet a friend for brunch after finishing a long week of work. She had no idea this short drive would turn into something that would stay in her memory for years. The woman, whose name was Maya, had worked hard her whole life. She wasn't flashy or loud about her achievements. She preferred to keep a low profile. Her SUV was new, clean, and not too fancy, just practical. She drove carefully, keeping her eyes on the road, humming to the soft music playing from the car radio. As she passed through the quiet neighborhood, she noticed a police car parked at a corner, half hidden under the shade of a tree. She didn't think much of it. She wasn't speeding or breaking any rules. She kept going, eyes forward, just like she always did. But a few moments later, blue and red lights flashed behind her. She checked her mirror and saw the police car following closely, lights blinking, siren short and sharp. For a second, she thought it must be a mistake. Still, she pulled over calmly to the side of the road. She took a deep breath, rolled down her window, and waited. The officer stepped out of his car. He was tall, with a straight posture and an expression that was more stern than professional. He adjusted his sunglasses and walked slowly toward Maya's car. Maya kept both hands on the steering wheel, just like she had been trained to do in law enforcement classes long ago. Her heart beat a little faster, not out of guilt, but because she had seen situations like this go wrong for other people. When the officer reached her window, he leaned slightly forward and spoke in a tone that carried authority, but also something else. A bit of arrogance. License and registration, he said. Maya nodded politely. Sure, officer. May I ask what the problem is? You failed to signal before turning back there, he replied quickly, his tone short. Maya blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, I thought I did. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked inside her car, his eyes moving over the seats, the dashboard, and then back to her face. It wasn't just a glance, it felt like an inspection. Where are you heading? He asked, crossing his arms. Just meeting a friend nearby, Maya said, keeping her tone even. Here? He asked, as if the idea surprised him. You live around here? No, she said softly. I don't live here, but my friend does. The officer gave a small laugh that wasn't friendly. Interesting. You know, this is a quiet area. We don't see many visitors like you around here. Maya stayed quiet for a second. She knew what he meant, but she chose not to react. She simply said, I understand, officer. He sighed and held out his hand impatiently. License and registration. Maya handed them over. Her movements were calm, almost slow, because she didn't want to give him any reason to think she was nervous or resisting. As he walked back to his car, she looked ahead through the windshield. A couple walking their dog slowed down, watching the scene. She saw curiosity in their faces, like they were wondering what she had done wrong. Minutes passed. The officer stayed in his car longer than expected. Maya looked at the dashboard clock. 10 minutes. Then 15. She sighed quietly. Finally, he stepped out again and came back to her window. Step out of the vehicle, he said. Maya frowned slightly. Is there a problem, officer? Just step out, ma'am, he said firmly. She didn't want to argue. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. The morning air felt colder now. The officer looked at her from head to toe as if judging her every move. He asked, This your car? Yes, it is. Mind if I take a look inside? Actually, I do, she said, trying to remain respectful. I don't consent to a search. His eyebrows rose. You got something to hide? No, she replied calmly, but I know my rights. That sentence seemed to bother him. He straightened up and looked toward his patrol car as if deciding whether to push further. Then he leaned closer, his voice lower but firmer. Ma'am, if you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem with me checking. Maya met his gaze. With respect, officer, I'm cooperating. You have my license, my registration, and I'm standing right here, but you don't have a reason to search my car. The silence that followed felt heavy. A small crowd was beginning to notice what was happening. Someone across the street paused while watering their lawn, and another person peeked from their porch. The officer seemed irritated. You know what? Wait right here. He went back to his car again. Maya stood there, her heart steady now. She had faced pressure before in much tougher situations. But this was different. It wasn't about danger. It was about being underestimated. She thought about how many people had gone through moments like this, feeling small, judged, unseen. And the sad truth was that if she hadn't had training, she might have panicked. A few more minutes passed before the officer returned. He looked at her again, this time trying to read her face. "So what do you do for a living?" he asked suddenly. "I work in federal service," she said, keeping her answer vague. "Federal, huh?" he said with a skeptical tone. "Like what, postal service?" Maya gave a small, polite smile. "Something like that." He nodded slowly, clearly not believing her. "Well, make sure you remember to signal next time. I could have written you a ticket, but I'll let you off with a warning." Maya nodded. "Thank you, officer." But even as he spoke, there was something in his voice that didn't sound like kindness. It sounded more like he wanted her to feel small, to know that he was the one in control. When he finally walked back to his car, Maya got into hers and closed the door softly. She sat for a moment, looking down at her hands on the steering wheel. She felt the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she felt disappointed. She had worked hard to protect this country, had risked her safety for people she would never meet. And yet here she was, treated like she didn't belong, simply because of how she looked and where she was driving. She started the engine and drove away slowly. As she turned onto the main road, she saw the same officer's car pull out again behind her, following for a short distance before turning away. Her heart tightened again, but she didn't let it show. By the time she reached the cafe to meet her friend, the bright morning felt dull. She parked, sat still for a while, and then finally took a deep breath. She didn't tell her friend everything when she met her. She just said, "It's been a strange morning." Her friend noticed something in her tone and asked, "You okay?" Maya nodded. "I'm fine. Just reminded that sometimes people see what they want to see." She smiled faintly. But inside she was thinking, if the officer had known who she was, if he had known that she worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, would he have treated her differently? Probably, but that wasn't the point. As the two women talked over coffee, Maya made a quiet promise to herself. She wouldn't let the moment go. Not because she wanted revenge or attention, but because she knew how easily these things could get worse for someone else, someone without her training, without her calm. She looked out the window of the cafe, watching cars pass by and people walking their dogs. Life continued as normal, but she knew that what had happened wasn't just a small mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of something deeper. And while she didn't plan it then, she knew that one day soon, she would cross paths with that same officer again, and when that day came, things would be different. The next few days passed quietly, but Maya couldn't stop thinking about that morning on the roadside. She had been in many serious situations before, but something about that encounter stayed with her. It wasn't the flashing lights or the ticket that never came. It was the way the officer had spoken to her, the cold tone, the disbelief in his eyes, the way he looked at her as if she didn't belong. At work, she tried to push it out of her mind. She spent hours reviewing files, writing reports, and joining case briefings. But her thoughts wandered back to that scene again and again. She had been calm that morning, polite and professional, but the memory still left a small mark inside her. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk, her colleague walked by and noticed her quiet expression. "You've been staring at that screen for 10 minutes, he said with a little laugh. Maya smiled faintly. "Just thinking." He leaned against the cubicle wall. "About work?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, work." He smiled and walked away, leaving her alone again. She stared at the monitor, pretending to focus, but her mind was somewhere else. Later that day, there was a meeting about improving coordination between the FBI and local police departments. As she listened to her supervisor talk about teamwork and mutual respect, she couldn't help but think how ironic it was. Just a few days earlier, she had experienced the exact opposite of what was being preached. Still, she stayed silent, taking notes, keeping her thoughts to herself. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind for a few minutes, watching the other agents leave. She thought about how easily things could go wrong for people who didn't have the badge she carried. That thought sat heavy in her chest. That weekend, Maya decided to drive out of the city and visit her parents. The quiet road helped her think. The hum of the tires against the pavement felt almost soothing. She played soft music and tried to let the noise in her head fade away. But it didn't. She thought about the officer again. His tone, the way he had looked at her ID, his words that had felt more like judgment than concern. She had seen many sides of human behavior in her job, but it still hurt when she became a target of the same bias she spent her career fighting to correct. When she reached her parents' home, her mother opened the door with a wide smile. "You're here early. I was just about to make dinner." "Perfect timing then," Maya said, smiling as she hugged her. The house smelled of home-cooked food and warm spices. It was the kind of comfort she needed. For a while, she let herself relax, helping her mother chop vegetables, laughing about small things and listening to her father talk about the neighborhood. After dinner, her father leaned back in his chair and asked, "So how's work treating you, sweetheart?" Maya hesitated. "It's fine," she said at first, but then added quietly, "Something happened a few days ago." Her parents looked at her, waiting. She told them about the traffic stop, not with anger, but with calm honesty. How the officer had pulled her over for a reason that didn't make sense, how his tone had changed when he looked at her, and how she had kept her cool even when he pushed her. Her mother frowned and reached across the table to hold her hand. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Maya said softly. "I just didn't expect it. Not like that." Her father's voice was gentle but steady. "Sometimes people see what they want to see. You did the right thing by staying calm." Maya nodded. "I guess. I just keep thinking, what if it had been someone else? Someone who didn't know how to stay calm?" Her mother sighed. "That's the sad part. But you did what you could. You showed grace." That night, as the house grew quiet, Maya sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The air was cool, and the sky was full of stars. She thought about what her father had said, about people seeing what they want to see. She couldn't change everyone's heart, but maybe she could do something to remind people that respect wasn't supposed to depend on appearance or assumptions. The next week, she returned to work and buried herself in her duties. She didn't tell anyone at the office what had happened. She didn't want sympathy. She just wanted to move forward. A few days later, her supervisor called her into his office. "We've got a joint task coming up," he said. "A cooperation case with the Brookdale Police Department." Maya's eyes lifted slightly. Brookdale. That was the same town where she had been pulled over. She kept her face neutral and simply said, "All right, I'll handle it." The task was about an identity theft case that required both local and federal involvement. Her job was to review some records and assist in field coordination. She prepared the files, read through reports, and set up her schedule for the week. On the morning of the meeting with the Brookdale police, she woke up earlier than usual. She dressed in a plain black suit, simple jewelry, and her badge tucked neatly into her coat. She looked in the mirror before leaving. Calm, professional, ready. As she drove toward the station, she noticed how familiar the streets looked. The same small houses, the same quiet roads. She even recognized the corner where she had been stopped. For a moment, the memory flashed in her mind. The flashing lights, the officer's voice. But she shook it off. She wasn't here for that. She was here for work. When she arrived at the Brookdale Police Department, she parked her car and walked toward the main building. The sign by the door read, "Brookdale Police, Protect and Serve." She took a deep breath before stepping inside. The front desk officer greeted her politely, and she introduced herself. "Agent Maya Johnson, FBI, I'm here for the joint briefing." The receptionist nodded and handed her a visitor badge. "Meeting room is down the hall, second door on the right." She thanked him and walked in. Inside the meeting room, several officers were already seated, talking quietly among themselves. A few glanced up when she entered. She offered a polite nod and took a seat near the front. Her supervisor wasn't there yet, but one of the senior local officers stood up to speak. "We appreciate your cooperation on this case," he began. "It's important that both departments are on the same page." Maya took notes while he spoke, keeping her focus on the work. But then as the door opened again, she looked up, and there he was. The same officer who had pulled her over days ago. He walked into the room looking confident, not yet noticing her. He greeted a few colleagues and began setting up some papers at the front of the room. Then his eyes met hers. For a second, his expression froze. His confidence flickered. He blinked as if not sure whether he was really seeing her. Maya kept her face calm, her posture professional. She didn't react and just looked at him the way she would look at anyone else in a meeting. He looked down quickly, his face turning slightly pale. The senior officer continued the briefing, unaware of the tension that had just filled the air. Maya listened carefully, taking notes as if nothing unusual was happening. The officer who had stopped her sat silently at the other end of the table, no longer making eye contact. When the meeting ended, everyone stood and began gathering their things. The senior officer turned to Maya and said, "Agent Johnson, we'll be working closely with Officer Thompson's team on this one." There was a pause, a small, loaded silence. The same officer nodded stiffly, trying to look composed. "Yes, sir," he said. Maya offered a polite smile and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you." Again. The words were soft, but he heard them clearly. His hand hesitated for a second before he shook hers. "Likewise," he said quietly, his voice uncertain now. As they left the room, she walked past him without another word. She didn't need to explain who she was or remind him of what had happened. Her badge, her presence, and her professionalism spoke for themselves. Outside, as she walked toward her car, she couldn't help but smile just a little. Life had brought them face to face again, not on a quiet street, but in a room where respect could no longer be denied. She didn't plan what would happen next. But she knew this was only the beginning of something much larger, a chance for truth, humility, and understanding to meet each other head-on. And for the first time since that morning, she felt at peace. The next morning, Maya arrived early at the Brookdale Police Department for the joint case follow-up. She liked to start her day before everyone else. Quiet time helped her focus. The hallway lights flickered softly, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. She set her files on the table and reviewed the notes from the last meeting. The same officer from before, the one who had stopped her on the road, would be part of today's coordination. His name was written clearly on the attendance list. She had noticed it yesterday but hadn't said a word. She had no interest in embarrassing anyone. She just wanted the work done properly. By the time the rest of the team arrived, she was sitting calmly with her tablet, reading through evidence summaries. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as officers greeted each other. Then he walked in, the officer who had once treated her like she didn't belong. Their eyes met for just a second. He quickly looked away and pretended to check his papers. Maya didn't react. She had long learned that silence was sometimes the most powerful response. The senior detective leading the task force started the meeting. "All right, everyone, let's go over the updates on the identity theft case. Agent Johnson will be overseeing federal coordination." All eyes turned to Maya. She stood up and spoke clearly, pointing at a few files projected on the screen. "The suspect has been using stolen IDs from 3 states. We've tracked activity across multiple bank accounts. We'll need to move quickly before they move the funds again." Her tone was professional and calm but confident. She knew her work and it showed. As she explained the plan, she noticed the officer from before watching her, this time differently. There was no arrogance now, no assumption. His expression was unreadable. Maybe confusion, maybe embarrassment. After the briefing, small groups formed to discuss assignments. Maya walked to the table near the front to collect a few printouts. The officer hesitated, then approached her. "Agent Johnson," he said quietly. She looked up, polite but distant. "Yes, officer?" He cleared his throat. "About the other day, on the road. I didn't realize—" She stopped him gently. "You don't have to explain," she said. "We're here to work." He nodded slowly, clearly uncomfortable. "Still, I shouldn't have." His voice faded, the words harder to find. Maya gave a small nod. "I appreciate that." Then she turned back to her work. She didn't mean to make him feel small, but she also wasn't going to comfort him. Accountability wasn't meant to be easy. As the morning went on, they worked side by side reviewing surveillance footage. The officer kept his tone respectful, asking questions when necessary but never overstepping. Maya answered politely, keeping the conversation focused on the case. During lunch, most of the team left the building. Maya stayed behind in the meeting room, writing notes on her laptop. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps. The same officer walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one near her. "Thought you might want one," he said quietly. She looked up, a little surprised. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, shifting awkwardly before sitting across from her. "I've been thinking about that day," he said after a pause. "It's been bothering me. The way I spoke, the way I acted. It wasn't right." Maya closed her laptop gently. "I appreciate you saying that," she said softly. He looked down at his hands. "You deal with people all the time in your job." "I guess I thought I did too. But that morning I didn't see you for who you were. I just made a judgment without reason." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she spoke carefully. "People make mistakes, officer. What matters is what they do after." He nodded. "I understand that now." They sat in silence for a while. The room felt lighter somehow. After lunch, the task force continued their work. They went through call logs, witness statements, and camera records. Maya led with clarity and calm confidence. Every now and then, the officer would glance her way. Not out of pride this time, but out of genuine respect. By evening, they wrapped up for the day. Maya gathered her things and walked out to the parking lot. The air was cooler now, the sky beginning to dim. As she unlocked her car, she heard someone behind her. "Agent Johnson," the officer called out. She turned. He walked over, holding a folder. "You left this inside him," he said. She smiled slightly. "Thank you." He hesitated again. "You know, when I first joined the force, I wanted to help people. I still do. But somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing people as people. Just faces, just stops, just cases. That day, it opened my eyes in a way I didn't expect." Maya studied his face for a moment. He looked different now, not defensive, not arrogant. "Just honest. I'm glad it made you think," she said quietly. "Growth comes from awareness." He nodded slowly. "I won't forget it," she smiled faintly. "Neither will I." They both stood there for a moment before going their separate ways. That night, as Maya drove home, she thought about how the day had gone. She hadn't planned to teach anyone a lesson. She had only wanted to do her job. But maybe the situation had turned into something bigger. A reminder that change often begins in quiet, uncomfortable moments. Over the next week, the case continued. Maya and the local team worked closely, often in the same room. The officer, who had once spoken to her with arrogance, now spoke with calm professionalism. He listened, asked questions, and respected her lead. The shift was clear to everyone, though no one said anything about it. During one long evening shift, as they reviewed documents together, Maya noticed him pause at one file. "It's strange," he said softly. "We chase criminals every day, but sometimes we forget how much trust people place in us." Maya looked at him. "That's true," she said. "A badge doesn't just give authority. It gives responsibility. People remember how we treat them." He nodded, thinking about her words. "You're right. And sometimes we need to be reminded." The next morning, during a larger team briefing, Maya presented the latest findings. She spoke with ease, explaining each step clearly. The senior detective praised her work and added, "We're fortunate to have such solid coordination from the Bureau." As the room filled with polite nods and murmurs of agreement, Maya noticed the officer watching her with quiet respect. There was no pride in his eyes now, only understanding. After the meeting, he approached her one last time. "Agent Johnson," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you. Not for forgiving me, but for handling it the way you did. If you'd reacted differently that day, maybe I'd still be the same person I was." Maya smiled. "Sometimes life teaches us lessons we didn't ask for. What matters is how we respond," he nodded. "I won't forget that." As she walked out of the station, the sunlight felt brighter than usual. For the first time since that day on the roadside, she felt a real sense of closure. The truth was, she hadn't needed to prove who she was. Her badge didn't make her worthy of respect. Her character did. And in showing calm where others might have shown anger, she had changed something in another person's heart. Driving home, she felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had faced something painful with grace. And though she didn't know it yet, the story of that quiet transformation, from pride to humility, from judgment to understanding, was only just beginning. The investigation moved forward quickly over the next few weeks. Maya had always been someone who believed in precision and patience. She didn't rush through her work. She took her time to understand every small detail. The identity theft case had grown bigger than expected, spreading across multiple states. It required teamwork, trust, and clear communication between departments. The local police and the FBI worked side by side every day. Maya noticed the difference in the atmosphere since that first week. There was more respect in the room now, more listening, more understanding. The officer who had once treated her with arrogance had changed his tone completely. He didn't talk much anymore, but when he did, his words carried humility. They sat together in long meetings, sometimes for hours, analyzing phone records and financial transactions. Maya often caught him glancing her way, as if still trying to understand how she could stay so calm after what had happened between them. She never brought it up again, and that seemed to make him even more thoughtful. One afternoon, after a long day of interviews, the team gathered in the briefing room. The senior detective announced that the case was finally wrapping up. They had traced the suspect and recovered a significant amount of stolen money. Everyone looked tired but proud. "Good work, everyone," the detective said. "This couldn't have been done without teamwork." People clapped softly. Maya gave a small smile, thankful the long days were finally ending. After the meeting, she stepped outside the building to get some fresh air. The sky was cloudy and the air smelled of rain. She leaned against her car, taking a quiet breath. The door opened behind her and the same officer walked out. "Long week," he said. Maya nodded. "Very long." He stood beside her, his posture relaxed but his expression thoughtful. "You ever think about how one small moment can change everything?" He asked quietly. She looked at him. "Sometimes," she said. "But I've also learned that what we do after that moment matters even more." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. "That morning, it made me rethink a lot of things. The way I talk to people, the way I carry this badge. I used to think authority meant control. Now I see it means responsibility." Maya smiled gently. "That's a good lesson to learn." He nodded again, then added, "It's not easy realizing you were wrong." "No," she said softly, "but it's harder staying that way." They stood quietly for a moment. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Finally, he said, "Thank you for the way you handled it. I don't think I would have respected anyone else the same way if they had shouted or humiliated me. You made me see myself instead of defending myself." Maya met his eyes. "I didn't do it for you," she said kindly. "I did it for what's right." He gave a small, grateful nod. "That's exactly why it worked." The rain started to fall in light drops, tapping gently against the pavement. They both looked up for a moment, sharing a quiet understanding that words didn't need to fill. Then they went their separate ways, each heading to their own cars. That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table sipping tea. She opened her laptop and began typing up her final report for the case. Her fingers moved quickly, writing down the facts, the findings, the official results. But when she finished, she sat back and stared at the screen. She thought about how much had changed, not just in the case, but in the people around her. Sometimes the biggest changes didn't come from punishment or force. They came from a mirror being quietly placed in front of someone's actions. And in this case, the reflection had been enough. The next day, an internal review meeting was scheduled at the local police department. It was standard procedure, a review of how the joint operation had gone, what had worked, and what could improve. Maya attended as part of the federal team. The room was filled with officers, both local and federal. The senior detective began by thanking everyone for their hard work. He talked about the value of communication and respect between agencies. Then he said something that caught Maya's attention. "I also want to acknowledge how this case showed the importance of professionalism and humility," he said. "Sometimes teamwork teaches us more than just police work." He didn't name anyone, but several people in the room seemed to understand what he meant. Maya sat quietly, her expression calm. When the meeting ended, she gathered her notes and started walking toward the exit. The officer who had once stopped her caught up behind her. "Agent Johnson," he said, "would you mind walking with me for a minute?" She nodded. They stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The parking lot was half empty, the late sun dipping low in the sky. He took a slow breath. "The department knows about that stop," he said quietly. "The review board saw the footage." Maya turned slightly toward him, her face unreadable. "I see. They called me in last week," he continued. "They showed me the video and asked me to explain my behavior. I didn't try to excuse it. I told them the truth. They decided to write it up as a formal warning and send me to additional training." Maya nodded slowly. "That sounds fair." He looked at her carefully. "You could have pushed for more. You could have made things worse for me. But you didn't. You just let things unfold. I want you to know that I respect that." She smiled faintly. "It was never about revenge. People make mistakes. What matters is what they learn from them." He nodded again. I've learned a lot. I'm not proud of that day, but maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe I needed it to change. Maya looked away toward the setting sun. We all have moments that test who we are, she said. What we do next defines us. He took a deep breath, then said quietly, I'm sorry again, not because I got caught, but because I was wrong. She turned to him. Apology accepted. A small smile appeared on his face, one that carried relief. Thank you, he said simply. They shook hands, this time not out of formality, but out of mutual respect. There was no tension left between them, only understanding. As Maya drove home that evening, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. She hadn't planned any of this. Life had just unfolded in a way that turned a bad moment into a chance for growth. Not just for him, but for her too. In the days that followed, news of the joint operation's success spread quietly within both departments. Her name came up in discussions about leadership and professionalism. But she didn't let it change her. She didn't want praise. She just wanted to keep doing her work the way she always had, with integrity and calm strength. One afternoon, a younger officer stopped by her office. Agent Johnson, he said shyly, I heard about how you handled a situation with one of our guys. That was impressive. You didn't lose your cool. Maya smiled gently. It's not about being impressive, she said. It's about remembering who you are, even when others forget who they're supposed to be. The young officer nodded, clearly inspired. I'll remember that. Maya went back to her work, but inside, she felt something warm, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that maybe, through patience and grace, she had started a small ripple that could lead to bigger change. As weeks passed, she saw that same officer again during another joint task. This time he carried himself differently. He greeted everyone politely, listened carefully, and treated people with real respect. She noticed it and smiled quietly. Sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. That night, as she drove home, the city lights reflected softly on her windshield. She thought about everything that had happened, the stop, the embarrassment, the confrontation, and now, the peace that followed. It all felt like a long journey toward understanding, one that had tested both of them in different ways. Life had come full circle, not through anger, but through grace. And in her heart, Maya knew that true justice wasn't always about laws and punishments. Sometimes it was about changing hearts, one person at a time. Months had passed since the case ended. The weather had changed from warm summer days to cooler evenings, filled with the smell of rain and fallen leaves. Life in the bureau had gone back to its usual rhythm: reports, briefings, investigations, and the quiet hum of serious work. But for Maya, something had changed inside. She still carried herself with the same calm and confidence, but there was a new kind of peace in her eyes. The experience with the local police officer had taught her something that no training manual ever could, that sometimes quiet strength could shift hearts more than authority ever would. One morning, as she was pouring coffee in the office kitchen, her supervisor walked in holding a folder. "Got a minute?" he asked. Maya nodded, setting her cup aside. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said. "The regional director is starting a mentorship program between the bureau and local departments. They're hoping to build better relationships and understanding between officers from different backgrounds. I think you'd be perfect to lead it." Maya raised her brows slightly. "Me?" he smiled. "You've already proven you can handle complicated situations with grace. That's exactly the kind of example we want others to follow." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd be honored." A few weeks later, the program began. Officers from different towns and counties gathered in a large training hall. There were lectures, group activities, and open discussions about trust, fairness, and community. At first, some people were defensive. They didn't like talking about bias or misunderstandings. But Maya had a way of speaking that wasn't accusing or harsh. She used stories, real experiences, and gentle questions that made people think instead of react. One afternoon, she stood in front of a group of new recruits and said, "Every badge we wear represents two things, an authority and service. The moment we forget the second, the first loses its meaning." The room was quiet. Her words carried truth, not pressure. And in that silence, she saw understanding start to form in their faces. After the session ended, one of the recruits approached her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you spoke about judging people too quickly. Have you ever had that happen to you?" She paused for a second, thinking of that day on the side of the road. Yes, she said softly. But the person who judged me learned from it, and that's what matters. We all have moments we wish we could take back. What matters is what we do after. The young man nodded slowly, clearly moved. Thank you for saying that. I'll remember it. The mentorship program continued for months. Maya traveled between departments, leading small discussions and joint training sessions. She met officers from all walks of life, some open-minded, others skeptical, but she never lost her calm approach. Bit by bit, people began to see things differently. One day, during a regional conference, Maya looked up from her notes and froze for a moment. Across the room, she saw a familiar face, the officer who had stopped her months ago. He was standing near the back of the hall listening to a presentation. He looked different now, more at ease, more grounded. When the session ended, he walked up to her with a small smile. "Agent Johnson," he said, offering his hand. She shook it firmly. "Officer Daniels. Good to see you again," he nodded. "You too. I heard about this program you started. It's doing a lot of good. Our department's already seen the difference." "That's good to hear," she said genuinely. He looked down for a moment, then back at her. "I wanted to tell you something. I was promoted recently. I'm training new recruits now, and I've been using something you said that day, about how authority means responsibility. I tell them that every week." Maya smiled, her heart warming at his words. "I'm glad you carried that with you." He nodded. "I did more than that. I've changed how I see people, how I talk to them. That one mistake, it taught me more than any academy class ever could." There was a quiet moment between them, filled with mutual respect. "I think that's what growth looks like," she said softly. "Yeah," he replied, "and I'm still learning." They talked for a few more minutes before parting ways again, not as strangers from a bad encounter, but as two professionals who had come full circle. Later that evening, as Maya walked to her car, she thought about how strange life could be. One small moment of disrespect had turned into a lesson that rippled through so many lives. If she had reacted differently that day, things might have gone another way. Anger leading to anger, blame leading to more division. But because she had chosen patience, a better path had opened. That night she sat by her window with a cup of tea, the city lights glowing outside. She remembered her father's words. Some people see only what's in front of them, not who's standing there. He had been right. But maybe, just maybe, she had helped someone finally see. Months passed again. The mentorship program grew, spreading to other states. Maya became known not just for her intelligence and dedication, but for her calm wisdom and empathy. She didn't chase recognition, but people began to look to her for guidance. One afternoon, while she was reviewing documents at her desk, a letter arrived. It wasn't official, just a plain white envelope with her name written neatly on the front. She opened it and began to read. "Dear Agent Johnson, you probably don't remember me, but I attended one of your sessions last year. I used to think being a police officer was just about following rules and giving orders. But after hearing you speak, I realized it's about listening too. A few weeks ago, I was in a situation where I could have handled things the wrong way. Instead, I remembered your words. To stay calm, to see the person, not the situation. It made all the difference. Thank you for helping me become better at my job. And as a person." Maya folded the letter slowly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She placed it inside her drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that kindness and patience were never wasted. Years later, Maya looked back on her career with quiet pride. She had handled major cases, helped communities, and built bridges where there had once been walls. But when people asked her what moment defined her the most, she never mentioned the big investigations or awards. She thought of that morning on the roadside, the flashing lights, the doubt in someone's eyes, and the calm voice she had used to respond. That was the day that taught her the true meaning of strength. Not the kind that demands, but the kind that transforms. On her last day before retirement, she walked through the bureau hallways one last time, greeting familiar faces, shaking hands, and sharing laughs. She had given decades of her life to her work, and she had no regrets. As she was leaving, she found one more letter in her mailbox. This one was handwritten too. She opened it and read the first line. It was from Officer Daniels. "Agent Johnson, I wanted you to know that today I'm taking a new position as captain. I'll be leading our department's community trust division, something that wouldn't even exist if not for you. You once said that what we do after a mistake matters more than the mistake itself. Those words changed my life. Thank you for believing in the better version of people. Maya smiled as she read the last line. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. Then she walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling at peace. The city was alive around her. Cars passing, people laughing, sirens in the distance, all the sounds of the world she had spent her life protecting. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, it was all worth it. As she drove away, her reflection caught in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, she saw not the agent, not the badge, but the person she had always been, steady, kind, and unshaken by prejudice. And in her heart, she knew the journey had been more than about justice. It had been about understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet power of doing what's right even when no one is watching. Because in the end, the greatest strength isn't found in the uniform or the title. It's found in the heart that chooses empathy over ego, again and again.